What do you say, everybody? With Tony Andracki, I'm Mick Gillispie. We're going to talk about the new hire, Craig Counsell, the Cubs pulling off a coup and getting the hottest manager in baseball to come to town. What does it mean to the organization? How do you feel about the way that David Ross was treated? Cubs legend, World Series champion. All of that we're going to talk about, and maybe even some free agents that the Cubs might want to spend some money on now that we know they're serious players. But first, I want to thank you guys for being here on the Cubs Baseball channel. Like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Let's talk some Cubs baseball. Oh, so much to talk about, my friend Tony. So much to talk about. You thought that you were just going to get like a very comfortable offseason. Maybe sign a free agent or two. And then all of a sudden, I called it the most savage move since Theo Epstein went out and got Joe Madden. What's the world been like in Chicago and around the Cubs after this move was made?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, I definitely thought it was going to be an offseason, basically punctuated by Shohei or Bellinger and figuring all that out. I wasn't expecting this move to the point where Monday, it was like right around noon, right around lunchtime. I was working from home. My wife was like, "Do you have much going on?" I was like, "No, it's just kind of waiting. Like GM meetings are starting, and I'm still in Chicago. I'm not in Arizona for them." And I was like, I think it's a pretty slow day. Seriously, a half an hour after I said that, Rosenthal's first tweet came out about how Craig Counsell's not going to the Mets and he's going to a team that already has a manager. And people started talking like maybe is it the Cubs? And it was like, 15 minutes after that it was out that, hey, it is the Cubs. So it was crazy. I mean, that was my fault for committing the cardinal sin of like jinxing it, of saying, it's a slow day. And then that happens. Just like, as you know, you talk about a game going by fast that you're watching and all of a sudden it slows to a crawl. So I couldn't believe it. I was completely stunned. I was very, very surprised just because everything that Ross had said, and then even Tom Ricketts, and, we don't hear from Ricketts a ton, but he specifically said Ross is our guy. I don't think the Cubs, they weren't lying by any of that. They weren't going into this offseason expecting to make a change at manager, but all of a sudden Craig Counsell became available. The Brewers committed a sin of their own by letting him become available, by, their offer apparently wasn't good enough for him. I don't know the exact specifics of their offer or what Counsell felt about it, but they let him become a free agent. They let him, talk to the Mets and, go to Cleveland. And I thought one of those two teams would sign him. And all of a sudden the Cubs come out of nowhere. And yeah, it's tough. It's a tough business. This is a good reminder because David Ross was such a beloved figure. I mean, think about it, like almost in decade here where he was the most popular backup catcher in franchise history, one of the most popular backup catchers, important backup catchers to a team ever. He helped change the culture. He was this mentor to players like Anthony Rizzo and Chris Bryant and Javi Baez. And so many of these guys credit David Ross for being a mentor to them. And these guys obviously ended up with huge plays, huge at-bats, all, icons in Cubs franchise history as well. Then he becomes a front office member for 3 years while Joe Madden finishes out his contract. Then he's the handpicked guy. David Ross was the handpicked guy to replace Joe Madden. And then here we are 4 years later after a pandemic in which Ross guided them to a division title through the pandemic without anybody testing positive for COVID. It's something that they were very proud of through 2020, but they just felt like everybody was pulling the same rope. 2021 was, all those World Series guys that I just mentioned, that trio of champions, were all traded away. 2022 is a rebuild. 2023 is the first year where there's like some level of expectation and competitiveness that you're feeling all the way throughout. And Ross helped bring the team from 10 under 500 to right in the thick of it. And they did fade down the stretch. It was, obviously the team was to blame for being 10 under 500 to begin with on June 8th. But I think Ross deserves a lot of credit for how he brought the team out of it, for getting the team back into the playoff race. Maybe he does deserve some of the blame too for falling out of it. But I don't think there's anybody, and the Cubs certainly wouldn't say this either, that thinks that Ross was the major problem or something that needed to be replaced. It's just a matter that Counsell is maybe the best manager in baseball. And Bruce Bochy certainly has a claim to it, 4 World Series, just winning his last one. But Counsell is definitely the hot name, the up and comer, and very well may take home manager of the year this year too. So like, I think it was just a matter of like Jed Hoyer really felt like the Cubs left some wins on the table, and it feels like with Counsell that they'll maximize this roster moving forward. And I mean, I tend to agree. And again, I'm not necessarily putting that on Ross. I just think Counsell is just so good at what he does.
Hanging out with Tony Andracki from Marquee Sports Network, and always great to talk to you, Tony. I just felt like, and I'll be honest with you, my opinion on Ross changed a lot throughout the season. I felt like Jed Hoyer, you score all of these runs. The team wasn't very good at winning games when they needed like the big high leverage hit for some reason. He's not even in the lineup, so I'm not putting that on him. I mean, it's not like he's up there striking out, but I felt like they left wins out there. The game that really kind of turned me off the most was Javier Assad's pitching against the Reds. They can't hit him, and then in the 9th inning, he gets pulled out and you blow the game. I felt like there was a group of relievers that he believed in, and those guys pitched all the time because there were so many close games there. And then he got those guys hurt, or at least they got hurt, because they were up so much and pitching so much. When I heard Jed Hoyer say that, I felt like that at the end of Joe Maddon's tenure, maybe he didn't take advantage of the whole roster. And then I heard him say the same thing about David Ross. I felt exactly the same way. And then to me, when they hired Rossi, I think that the guy they wanted to hire would have been Brandon Hyde, but then the Orioles got him. I always felt like that Brandon Hyde was a Theo Jed guy, just the way that he approached the game, that he could kind of deal with the younger guys, but he was still a no nonsense type guy. And and I thought Dave Ross did a really good job of the no nonsense stuff. Like the guys played hard for him every single day, man. I respect that a lot. On top of the fact that he's an awesome guy and he's also a Cubs legend, but the inexperience to me, working with the entire roster, particularly the younger players, not getting the best out of some of the guys in my mind, the Mervises and the PCAs and guys that I know can play, and then they go there and they don't, might not be his fault, but at the end of the day, that you put that on the manager, the close games, and also the fan reaction. You're on a site where I would say, like, I don't know, at least 70% of the people that commented were like, man, I can't stand the way that he's doing this or that. They are the people that pay the bill. You start to pressure. That pressure comes from those guys to the Ricketts to Jed Hoyer. And at the end of the day, I felt like, and this is what I want you to tell me what you thought, but I felt like when they ended up 2 games short, that there was an accountability that someone was going to have to pay. And either going to be Jed Hoyer, maybe next year, if you don't make it again, or David Ross and Jed Hoyer, if you don't make it again next year. So I felt like, and I even put a video out on here talking about that there's an accountability that you have when you're in charge, that, it's just like this when front office people get let go. They don't come into work going, hey, you know what, I'm getting fired today, and Tom Ricketts really hasn't had that track record. But at the end, but again, winning is what this is all about. And this move to me signified that Jed Hoyer was serious about the accountability. That's kind of what I read into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start with the point on the fans, because it's a point that I've heard a bunch, and I can't say for sure how much Jed or Tom or even Carter Hawkins or the rest of the front office weighs fan opinion or pays much attention to it. I do know that if you just listen to fans about managers, that every manager in baseball would have been fired before this year was up. I mean, everybody. Like
they
Bruce
hate them
Bochy,
all.
I'm sure Bruce Bochy would have been fired because Texas went through, issues. And I'm not like particularly plugged into like Rangers fan base, but I know people complain about managers. They always look for places to place blame, and I get that. And also, I mean, just from a Cubs perspective, like, if it was up to Cubs fans, Joe Maddon would have been fired when they were down 3-1 in the World Series, or even after Game 6, and he won them the only championship in the last 110 plus, 113 years now. So, it is definitely tough for sure when it's just the fan base looking at the manager like that. I'm sure that there's some element of it that that Jed was thinking about, because he did have an interesting line in talking with reporters at GM meetings in Arizona just about how he felt like it was, I forget exactly what it was, so I don't want to quote him directly, but to paraphrase, he felt like he needed to do this move for the fans, that it was a difficult decision, a very difficult decision because of his longstanding relationship with David Ross, to try to make this move and to decide that they have to go this route for Craig Counsell to maximize the roster, to maximize wins, to win, to serve the fan base the best. He felt Counsell was the best option, not his buddy and close confidant in David Ross. So I do think the fans were a factor there. But yeah, I think too, when you look at the fact that the Cubs fell short, it's hard to. I look back at this season, and I do think that too much was made of the last few weeks, because I think if anything, if you want to point the blame at anybody, I think that Jed and the front office deserve some blame for sure. Obviously, Ross and the coaching staff, for the players on the field. I mean, Dansby Swanson shouldered a lot of blame. Like his batting average plummeted. He made some key errors. Seiya Suzuki made a key error. Nico Horner made a couple errors, in September, or misplays. All of a sudden, the defense failed them. Some of the pitching became issues. Stroman came back and was nowhere near as effective as he was before. So like there's a lot of things that went around. They didn't acquire any bullpen help except for Jose Cuas at the deadline. And I understand that the price was high for relievers, but like they didn't add an area that was probably the weakest area of the team, or at least had the least amount of depth. And like you mentioned, all those guys ended up getting hurt. I don't know who is for sure to blame. Maybe Ross does shoulder some of that blame. I think that they climbed back into it the way they did for those few months because of the way Ross ran those relievers, maybe into the ground, but like also he was rolling them out and he was out there talking to them all the time. And he also was very protective of guys, and, talking about Mark Leiter Jr. when he was down, and you mentioned Cincinnati and stuff like that. Like, I think, Leiter wasn't available for that Cincinnati series in early September because he had some things going on. Then he wasn't available for a week late in September too. And Ross was always trying to be protective of that. I do know that players loved Ross. They absolutely loved him. They played super hard for him. I think Kyle Hendricks said it really great at the end of the season that like the team as a whole, the roster of players, felt most disappointed they didn't make the playoffs because they felt like they let Ross down. And so I think that speaks to his leadership skills, the way that he commanded the locker room. I do think that there were some moments where like he could have been a better in-game manager. He's growing on the job. He was growing on the job. I mean, just everything that all in-game management, believe it or not, was not at the top of his list for at least probably the first 2 years of being manager, which seems crazy. But it's like we said, the pandemic, and then figuring out all these new rules and protocols, and like, no fans in the stadium. And then, is there a DH? Is there not a DH? Are there 3 batter minimum? And like all these different things were crazy. And then obviously the big picture of trading away these guys, like there was just so much else going on that Ross had to manage. And we saw very little drama over Ross's tenure here. And I think that's also a testament to him. So, Hoyer even said to himself that like, Ross was still growing on the job, and I think that's true. I think if it were not Counsell that were available, we still would be talking about Ross as going into his 5th year, and maybe 6th and 7th and 10th, who knows. But it's just a matter of Counsell, who is probably the best in-game manager in baseball. What he has done in Milwaukee, getting the most out of lesser rosters, at least on paper,
right,
and maximizing a bullpen and a pitching staff. There's nobody in the game that does it better than Counsell. He's an extremely intelligent guy. He has a great feel for the game. He obviously blends analytics and stats and all that kind of stuff really well. He clearly works well with front office. I don't know exactly how that's going to go in Chicago with a new front office, with obviously new and heightened expectations in a much bigger market. I think Milwaukee is the smallest market in baseball. Chicago is the 3rd biggest. I'm curious what the fan reaction is going to be in July if the Cubs are 5 games under 500 or something. Like I don't know how all that's going to play out. I do know that Hoyer, it was a very bold move by him, but he's doing what he thinks that is best. And like, he's somehow been able to remove emotion from this ever since he took over for Theo. He's removed emotion, and whether it's a World Series hero like Rizzo, trade him away, or Bryant, trade him away, Javi, trade him away, Wilson Contreras, let him walk in free agency, David Ross, another option became available. Let's go with that guy. Like, Jed is really doing everything he can to try to put the best team on the field.
And I think he's done a good job too, as far as rebuilding the organization. Something that that when you're in the major leagues, in Chicago, you might not see that either. But I've been super complimentary of what he and Carter and those guys have done as far as just replenishing talent and developing guys, not just pitchers. And we've seen Jordan Wicks, and eventually we'll see Ben Brown. Cade Horton's going to be an ace, which is really exciting because I don't remember the last time the Cubs have drafted a guy that's that much of a difference maker pitching. They've drafted guys, but they haven't been like this guy's going to be. So that's exciting too. They've got so much talent. They don't even know what to do with it all right now. And I really give him a lot of credit on that as well. And I like this move. I mean, I'm just going to go out there and say it, not personally. I feel bad for David Ross, but I feel like this is the type of thing that got the Cubs, changed the perception of the Cubs when Theo was here. When you go out and get Joe Madden, it's very parallel because Joe Madden had a ton of success too, but hadn't won a World Series. Now he had more success in the playoffs than Counsell. And that's been the biggest rub is Counsell's lack of success in the postseason. So, we can get into that. But he's with an organization that traded their closer in the middle of a pennant race. And I don't ever see the Cubs doing something like that. So I can't. They might burn down Wrigley if they traded their all-star superstar closer, right at the trade deadline in a year where they were going to, make the playoffs. You said something, though, that I want to ask you your opinion on. You made a good point, something that I haven't thought about on any of the shows that I've done. The player reaction. What are the players saying about this? What's their reaction going to be? Because you're right. David Ross was not only liked, but he was respected. Both things. And Kyle played with him, obviously in 2016, and had nice things to say about him. But you could tell by the way that the guys went to work every day, and the comments that they had about him. And like you said, like they're upset that they didn't make the playoffs because they let him down. What's their reaction been?
I don't know, to be honest. And I wish I did. I wish I knew what all these guys were thinking. It's not like we've tried to scour like some social medias and stuff of some of these players, and for obvious reasons, there's not a lot of comments on there. But yeah, I imagine that a lot of them are certainly disappointed to some extent. I think there's a lot of just around baseball. There's obviously a lot of respect for Craig Counsell. I am very, very curious, and I think that's the biggest challenge Counsell has to face here is how that dynamic works out now, because Ross was a universally beloved and respected manager. And I shouldn't necessarily say universally beloved, but universally respected for sure. And so many guys in that clubhouse for sure, loved him, loved playing for him, loved being around him. Even when he was in the front office, when he was a player, like all of these things, he's had such an enormous impact on so many players. And to lose a guy like that is very difficult. And then to be Counsell to have to replace that, a guy who is, for whatever fans may think, like he is a legend. Like it's not often backup catcher becomes a legend, is carried off the field like Rudy, but David Ross was, and he earned that, I think, justifiably so. And so I'm curious to see how the player reaction is moving forward. And I don't anticipate any drama. I'm not saying that, but just that's going to be a big change now is how Counsell manages the team moving forward. And if there are rough patches, I'm curious to see how that plays out, right? Like, again, fan base or criticism, if players, buy in immediately, I'm sure they will. I think as a group, the players have already created a culture, and Jed talked about the culture at the end of the year, and they were really happy just in general about the winning culture. They felt like that was one of the main takeaways from this season was the culture they set moving forward. And they feel like they raised expectations. They raised just general expectations, I guess, is just the word I'll keep coming back to on it. But they had just an idea of what they wanted to do moving forward. And Ross was a huge component of that. He helped set that new standard. Dansby Swanson was huge in that. Yan Gomes, Nico Horner, Ian Happ, all these guys were big on it. Regardless of Counsell, I think that's that standard, that those expectations will be there moving forward. Like we said, we know what Counsell is as a manager, but that's going to be the biggest thing is like how he relates to these players, how he forms these relationships, because for a lot of these guys, Ross had multi-year relationships with them.
Right.
Again, going back to 2020 or even beyond, like, with Ian Happ came up in 2017, Ross was a part of the front office. Like, knowing these guys and all of that kind of stuff, that will be the most interesting dynamic over the course of this winter and then in spring training. But by the time the regular season's out, I imagine it's not something we'll be talking about anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, now and then once Craig Counsell talks next week, I'm guessing he's going to go right to the podium and say, I'm here to win right now. And that's going to be that, right? So it's either going to be like when Joe Madden showed up, you either win or you don't, and you're going to be judged based off of your wins and losses, just like Rossi. Even though we all like him, they didn't make the playoffs this year. And, for whatever reason that was, it's him that's falling on the sword for that. Do you know any of the details? I read the story in The Athletic. Thought they always do a great job about Jed jumping on a plane and going down to Tallahassee. I would imagine if I was Rossi, as much as I like Jed, I would be pretty fired up about this. I don't know how I would have handled that in a professional way. I would have had a lot to say after the shock wore off. Do you know any of the details on how that went?
No, none specific. I just know that Jed said that, that the conversation was really respectful and that he has such a good relationship with David Ross. That's what he was saying in the GM meetings in Arizona this week. So, yeah, I would be very curious, too, to be like a fly on the wall for that. Just knowing how passionate and competitive David Ross has been and such tough news. And, as much as fans and media members were blindsided by this, or even players, I imagine Ross was even more blindsided than any of this. I don't think, he's been spending the last month plus trying to get ready for the offseason and the new season and, in Florida with his family and taking care of his kids and being a dad and that kind of stuff. And then bam, the rug's kind of taken out from underneath him. So just seeing how he was after some losses and how fired up he would be after close games, like I can only imagine what that was like to be Jed. I don't envy Jed sitting in, one, having to make this decision in general, and two, having to sit in those seats. But I do think that, again, to give Jed credit for this, it's just a matter of it's another indicator that the Cubs are like all in. And I'm not necessarily saying all in for 2024.
Yeah.
But they don't make this move if the goal is just to make the playoffs, if the goal is just to win the division. Like, they want to get back to the World Series and they want to hoist another championship banner, have another World Series trophy, have rings with, 108 diamonds or whatever. And again, like, they want to get back to that. They believe Counsell gets them there faster than Ross, or it's more likely possible with Counsell than with Ross. And so, like, that, I think that's a really important facet of this, is that Jed basically just, flexing the financial might of the Cubs, absolutely the biggest, manager contract in baseball, but also, like, they're the Cubs again, and they're going out there and showing what they can do, what they should do. That's not to say that they're going to sign Shohei Ohtani or bring Bellinger back or whatever else might happen this offseason. But I think that the expectations and standards from even what I was saying before have only further heightened, because David Ross could have gotten the team to the playoffs absolutely in 2024 and maybe won the division, and maybe they do go on a Diamondbacks like run and get all the way to the World Series. I don't know. But to bring home the championship banner, Jed specifically, and the Cubs feel like Craig Counsell gets them there. And I think it's hard to argue against that. But I also think that it makes things a little bit more interesting this winter and going into next year, because all of a sudden, like, the Cubs are one step closer to being a powerhouse. And this is just a move that could be another indicator that they're going to have like a huge offseason. Again, there's no guarantee of that, but I think it's definitely more possible now than it was before.
Well, I agree with everything you said there. And it certainly feels like that same momentum when they hired Joe Madden. All of a sudden, there's wind behind their sails again. And one of the biggest criticisms from fans has been, they feel like they run the organization like it's a small market. I don't agree with that. I mean, this is a big payroll. And now all of a sudden you're going to have all of these young guys that are starting to show up now that are going to be pushing for positioning. So you got to be careful when you go out and sign people, because you don't want to waste money or sign someone when you have someone in the minor leagues that is going to be a lot cheaper and could do basically the same thing. And that's where I want to go next. Cody Bellinger and other free agents available. What do you think about the Cubs being able to re-sign Bellinger? I know he really liked David Ross, but I'm sure that in the same ilk, he's probably going, man, these guys, They're damn serious right now about winning. And then, I'm thinking like him as far as the free agents go. We've heard of from, maybe trade like a Pete Alonso or a Juan Soto. I believe Juan Soto is definitely somebody they would get if they could get him and sign him. And then, Josh Hader, maybe Blake Snell, Austin Nola to help the pitching out. But if I'm any of those guys, when the Cubs got Madden, remember, the Cubs got Madden, and then all of a sudden they got John Lester.
Yeah.
And Lester would not have came if Joe Madden wouldn't have been the manager. And no offense to Ricky Renteria, but he's not coming if it wasn't Joe Madden. He's not coming if you didn't feel the surge of energy and everything else that we're feeling right now. We felt the same way when Joe Madden was hired from Tampa. So your thoughts on bringing back Bellinger, and then other, not just free agents, but you could even say guys that they might target in trades, and the possibility of this roster getting better.
Yeah, I mean, to your point on the Lester Madden thing, I think this move for Counsell is a message to the rest of the league as much as it is the fan base, just about the Cubs are back. And I think it's a bigger move even than going out and signing Dansby Swanson, or 2 off seasons ago signing Seiya Suzuki or Marcus Stroman. Obviously, Stroman's now opted out of the contract and a free agent, but I think this is as big a move as any of that. And yeah, I do think it does send a message to any of the free agents. I don't know that it'll ultimately change anybody's mind. I do think that just because of how great Wrigley is, how great this fan base is, the market, all of that, and the fact that the Cubs do have financial flexibility, I think that this doesn't really change anything for like a Cody Bellinger per se, but I think it can help. It can't hurt, that's for sure. On Bellinger, I know he loved it here. Obviously, he was very comfortable. Some of the members of the coaching staff, like Dustin Kelly, the hitting coach, he had ties with, back to the minor league days in the Dodgers. I am curious how Counsell's arrival impacts the rest of the coaching staff. Tommy Hotovy is a great pitching coach, great communicator. I can't say for sure that all of these guys are going to be back because we don't know for sure right now, right? So like what Counsell does to the rest of the coaching staff, I do think has some sort of impact. And Bellinger had this familiarity with Dustin Kelly and the rest of the hitting group, assuming that they all stick around. I think that would only strengthen the case as well. But I think with Bellinger, it'll just come down to the contract because he's 28. He's coming off one of the better years of his career, certainly one of the best in the last few years. One of his healthiest, after like a hairline fracture in his leg and then separating his shoulder in 2020, and then, having to have surgery and strengthen that, and just a couple of down years because of it. He got back to being one of the premier hitters in all of baseball, and a guy that the Cubs need. He is somebody that the Cubs need because he was the only guy in that lineup that was a fearsome bat. You take the old kind of Bill Belichick adage of like, you want to take the best player out of the game. That's what he does in football. You look at the Cubs lineup, Bellinger was the one guy you wouldn't want to beat you every day. You weren't as scared of Seiya Suzuki or Dansby Swanson, Nico Horner, Ian Happ, whoever it may be. It was Bellinger that you were worried about. Mm-hmm. You take that out of the equation, the only other guy that can compare to that is Shohei Ohtani in free agency right now. Yeah, maybe Juan Soto or Pete Alonso or some of the other guys in trade markets, but like Bellinger is in terms of the guys specifically available, it's Bellinger and Shohei right now. And the Cubs are not going to be a better team if Bellinger's not back. So I think they're highly motivated. They love him. They absolutely loved him here. They would love to have him back. It's just a matter of like, if a team like the Yankees, or I've mentioned the Giants before, because I feel like the Giants, after losing out on Judge and Correa, may end up having, blown the water out for like one of these deals. Maybe it's Shohei, maybe it's Bellinger, who knows? But like, if it's a somewhat reasonable contract, I fully expect the Cubs to be right in there on the Bellinger sweepstakes. And I do think that I wouldn't say it's like particularly likely, but I think it's very, very possible that Bellinger comes back. As for, trades or other free agents, I mean, the Cubs are going to be shopping there. Like, I don't think a Hader makes a ton of sense because under Jed, they haven't paid for relievers. They haven't even handed out multi-year deals for relievers. So I don't think they're going to necessarily go to $75 million or $100 million, whatever it's going to cost to sign Josh Hader. But I do think that with like Bellinger or even Shohei, or maybe even a guy like Nola or Blake Snell, or adding to the the rotation, I think there certainly will be shopping. And on the trade market, I think now is the time, and you alluded to it earlier, there's just a lot of talent in the system. Now is a good time to trade some of that talent away and help the big league club and kind of push your chips all in for 2024, but also for beyond. Like, not mortgage the future necessarily, but a guy that maybe you do, it is a Juan Soto or a Pete Alonso, and then you try to sign them, because they're going to be free agents after this season. So I am very, very curious to see what the Cubs do. I know that they need at least a hitter or two. They need a starting pitcher, preferably a reliable, maybe frontline veteran. But as of right now, this roster is not better than it was in 2023, and there's some work that they need to do to go make it better for 2024 and moving forward.
Yeah, no, they've got so many guys. I mean, Nelson Velazquez and now Jonathan Perlaza, which I was shocked that they didn't add him to the 40-man. But then you start to look and you're like, they got a ton of outfielders. I mean, they got Pete Crow Armstrong, they got Owen Casey, they got, Alexander Canario. I mean, you just end up with so many guys. There are some players that they could deal that are ready to be impact players in the major league level, like you'll see with Velazquez. He's kind of got a peak of it last year, but the guy can play. He can definitely play, and he's going to hit a lot of home runs in Kansas City, and he's going to do nothing but get better. But you brought up a name that I wasn't even thinking about, and I should have been. I should have made a note on this, but Shohei Ohtani. There's GMs that say don't count the Cubs out on this, that they're a dark horse for Shohei. And honestly, I could see the Cubs being a player in this. Obviously, you got issues with the fact that he had Tommy John surgery, so he can't pitch. But last year he was hitting, even though he couldn't pitch, and he was doing fine at it. I don't know what the return is. I bet you he's going to miss maybe half of the season coming back from that. But would that scare the Cubs away from signing him? See, I don't think so. I've always felt like what Theo Epstein does better than anyone else, and I see Jed Hoyer kind of trying to do the same thing, is when they target elite talent, going after it. And the other thing, I feel like if the Cubs were serious about Ohtani, and remember, they got some money. Jason Hayward finally came off the books, and then Marcus Stroman opted out. So, that's like $43 million right there, or something in that neighborhood. Ohtani is going to cost you a lot of money, but you're going to make it back on merchandise sale. Can you imagine the amount of Ohtani? I'd have to have the Ohtani jersey. I'd have to have the Ohtani bobblehead doll, the hat, anything that he did. We would all buy it. Plus, you have a whole continent over there that loves him, including Japan, which, I mean, he's like a god over there. And we know why now, because he's becoming that way over here. They said he was the Japanese Babe Ruth before I ever saw him. I thought, wow, that's pretty high praise. And then he comes over and he's like, wow, I mean, in a way, he's better than Babe Ruth. Yeah. The pitching. And I could see him saying, hey, you Darvish, why'd you like it over there in Chicago? Loved it. Well, why? Well, you play the day games. The fans are great. There is a Japanese community in Chicago. Ask Seiya. Oh, I love it here. Ask Fukudomi. I love it here. Like, the Japanese players that have come over and played for the Cubs have been embraced by the fan base and the community, and they've loved it. They like the day games. So I know the Dodgers are by far the favorites in this. I'm with you on the Giants. I think the Giants are going to be the player in the Bellinger thing too. I agree with everything you said. If the Yankees don't sign him, it'll be the Giants. They may overpay because they missed out last year. But with that said, I could definitely see the Cubs saying, you know what, if we're going to pay for someone, why not pay for someone that helps us in two different areas?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the big area, like you mentioned, that he won't pitch in 24, but what he will help them in is an area that they just do not have, and that's left-handed power, really just left-handed bats in general. I mean, Pete Crow Armstrong, assuming he is the opening day center fielder, which I don't think is a guarantee. There's also no guarantee he's going to hit, but obviously he's a lefty. But then you have Ian Happ, and then you have Miles Mastrobuoni, and that's it as far as lefties go, unless Matt Mervis is making the roster. Owen Casey, you mentioned him too. Like, maybe he makes his debut in Chicago at some point in 24, but they don't have a ton of left-handed options, particularly left-handed guys who can strike fear into the opposition, and really hit righties really well. And that's also Mike Tauchman, that's why he was playing so much in 2023 here, was because the Cubs needed left-handed bats to really go against righties a lot. And, when the Cubs were at their best, there was Tauchman leading off, there was Bellinger hitting in the middle of the order behind Ian Happ. So assuming Tauchman's back, like maybe that's a factor again, but he hasn't hit a ball out of the ballpark like Shohei Ohtani does or Cody Bellinger. And PCA, you can't expect him to do that either. And same with Owen Casey, even if he does come up. So Ohtani fills such a need, such a direct short-term need that the Cubs have. Obviously, a lot of teams in baseball have that need for left-handed power, especially a guy like Shohei's ability offensively. But yeah, I think they could also cover the rotation for 24 and then figure out the rotation moving forward with Shohei in it for 2025 and beyond. We don't know what Kyle Hendricks' status is after 2024, but imagine a rotation led by like Justin Steele, Shohei Ohtani, maybe Jordan Wicks is in there, Cade Horton, as you mentioned. Like then it starts to become really, really interesting. So I do think that it does make a lot of sense now, of course, to go out and get Shohei, and they have the financial flexibility. You mentioned of contracts coming off the book, and going back to like the Cubs are back statement that I was making earlier. I mean, they are back in part because of the money. Like they got rid of Jason Hayward with a year left on the deal. This season, they're paying David Ross $4 or $5 million, whatever his deal was. They're paying Trey Mancini $7 million. They're paying Tucker Barnhart's $3 million. David Bodie $5 million. Like the amount of dead money on the books for the Cubs in 2024 because of aggressive moves that they made on the roster in 23 to make the team better, to try to get to the playoffs. And now the managerial roster, like clearly they're putting their money where their mouth is. They are trying to get back to the playoffs and get back to the World Series. Shohei obviously helps them for that. I don't know I'm so curious to see how this market plays out for him, because he won't pitch in 24. I don't think he's going to get $500 or $600 million like people originally were thinking a few months ago, but maybe some team's going to go nuts. But if it is $400 million over 10 years, which is still an amazing amount of money, like you said, the marketing aspect, I think is unquantifiable right now, because you talk about all of that, like, any sort of media rights or tickets or marketing or merchandise and sales and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, you feel like you'd have to approach half of that, maybe even more so, if you sign Shohei over the life of the deal, plus whatever you end up making in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like there's an element of it that I could see the contract paying for itself with a guy like Shohei in particular, and what he could do in a market like this. So assuming he wants to come further from the West Coast and come to the Midwest here, I do think the Cubs very much are in play. I mean, I remember the reports from years ago before he signed with the Angels that he was really impressed with the Cubs and what their offer was, and he really wanted to be on the West Coast, and that was why he chose the Angels. But like after being in LA, after never playing in the playoffs and seeing what that's like, to have an opportunity to come to a team that like is on the cusp of making a playoffs or having some sustained success, not like a dynasty or anything like that, but like I think that would be really enticing. And then again, the Seiya aspect I think is pretty big too. Like there has to be some level of familiarity immediately here with a player from your home country here having success, can speak to it. You mentioned the Darvish aspect too, and Darvish spoke so highly of Chicago. So I certainly think the Cubs will be in play here. And I think it's a very real possibility. I'm not saying that they're the favorites by any means, but I would not be surprised at all if Shohei has some sort of introductory press conference at the corner of Clark and Addison this winter.
Yeah, and think about this. You work for Marquee. You want to sell apps and subscriptions.
Oh, yeah.
You want people to have to watch your games. Put Shohei Ohtani on the roster. And when he was with the Angels, it's like playing for a 4A team. No one really cares about them. You play for the Cubs, and you know this, everything you do becomes a big deal because you're wearing that Cubs uniform, and players love it. And one of the things Joe Madden said, talking about when he got hired to be the Cubs manager and the way all that went down, is that it changed his career. And it's going to change Craig Counsell's career, and it would change Shohei Ohtani's career. But it would also change Marquee if you had Shohei Ohtani. Like, get through the first year and then think about it. The guy's going to pitch every fifth day, and all the other stuff that goes with it. All the long home runs that he would hit. Oh man, I can only imagine. Maybe I'm just dreaming, the Cubs fan in me, but I think that it would be great. Well, tell us what you guys got going on. Love reading your stuff. on the Marquee website. I catch you on Twitter a lot too, Tony, but fill everyone in.
Yeah, GM meetings this week is obviously a big thing. My colleague Andy Martinez is down in Arizona, and he and Bruce Levine have a podcast coming out soon to just recapping all the GM meeting stuff. I was on a podcast earlier this week with Tim Stebbins on our Cubs Weekly podcast, just breaking down the Counsell move and what it means for the Cubs moving forward. So that'll be a lot of fun. And then we have it all covered on air as well on Cubs 360 with Taylor McGregor, Cole Wright, and others, Jim DeShays, Boog Shambi, so on, just recapping all of this stuff. And we'll have shows throughout the offseason. So it'll be a lot of fun. Can't wait for the offseason to really kind of kick into gear. And winter meetings in December is also going to be extremely fun in Nashville. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to see what the Cubs do. And again, I fully expect them to be players for guys like Bellinger, like Shohei. Whether it comes to pass, I don't know, but none of that would surprise me. I think they're going to be all in on getting back to the World Series.
I agree with you, my friend. I agree with you. Great job with all of the content that you guys have posted. It's been 24/7 Cubs for me since Monday, when I was totally blindsided. I said, this can't be real. And then when I saw it was Ken Rosenthal, I'm like, we're going live. We did like 2 hours on here, in shock. But that's a good thing. That's what you want when you're running the Cubs. You want people to be excited about what's going on.
No, for sure. And I think that there's legitimate reason for excitement. Like we said, I think it's just a message to the rest of baseball. The Cubs are back. And I fully expect that to just continue over the next couple of years as Jed continues to build out the rest of his plan.
Awesome. Hey, guys, I want to remind you that our channel is presented right now by the Tennessee Smokies, the Cubs AA affiliate. They won their first championship in 45 years, and they got the swag to prove it. Find out for yourself at smokiesbaseball.com/store. Thanks, Tony, and we'll talk to you again soon.
No problem. Thanks.